Down here to my right, in the bottom drawer of my desk, is a box of toys for my grandkids. And among those toys is a little superhero figure, Superman. Supposed to be one of the most powerful superheroes. And remember, this is all fiction, but he has a weakness. It's called kryptonite. He can do lots of things, but in the face of kryptonite, he can't do things. He becomes weak. Does God have a kryptonite? Are there some things that God can't do? We're going to take a look at that today. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. We are looking at who is God. We're looking at God's all-powerfulness. And when we get done talking about God's all-powerfulness, or in the midst of it, sometimes you get people that'll come along and they'll say, well, if God's all-powerful, can he make a rock so big that he can't lift it? That would be all-powerful. And that kind of creates an oxymoronic idea. A rock, you're powerful enough to make a rock, but it's too big for you to lift. And when people say that, there's certain things that they don't understand about the character of God. And that is that when we say God's all-powerful, we're saying that there's no limit to his power to do what he desires to do, what he plans to do. He's able to do those things, but there are things God can't do. Let's just look at some examples. Hebrews chapter 6:18, in the midst of a promise that he's making, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie. It's impossible. Now the word over here is a word related to our word for power, and it talks about capability. So I pull up this other window here just so you can see this, and this is out of Galatians 4:15, where Paul says, well, if it were possible, you would have plucked out your eyes. And you can look at this word here and compare it to the Greek word over here, and you can see the only difference is the one over here in Hebrews has an alpha in front of it. It looks like a letter A, and that alpha negates this. So here it says, if it were possible. Here it's saying not possible. That alpha in the beginning means it's not possible. It can't happen. It won't work. And if you understand that, then what he's getting at, what he's saying in the midst of all of this, he says that there are some things God's incapable of doing. God is a God of truth, therefore it's impossible for God to lie. James chapter 1 says, for God cannot be tempted by evil. And it's simply an adjective of the word temptable, meaning he's not temptable. It's again that alpha in the beginning of the word that means untemptable with evil. So you can't tempt God with evil. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 13 says, your eyes are too pure to approve of evil. You cannot, or not are you capable, akal here in the Hebrew, capable then to look at wickedness or unfaithfulness, to break away or to be unfaithful to something that you've promised to God, or people had made a commitment to God in that regard. 2 Timothy chapter 2, and this is a very important passage because this is a passage of not just about eternal security, but I believe this is also a passage that is about our future as believers. And it says, if we are faithless, and by the way, in the Greek, this word faithless, are faithless, is a indicative verb, which simply means, well, it's crucial to this. We don't need to go through and explain an indicative verb, but it's talking about reality, and then it's combined with the conditional particle I, and that makes a first-class condition, which you're going, okay, wait a second, you're getting beyond me. But all that means is in Greek, the writer here, Paul, is assuming that this is true. He's assuming that it's true. In fact, sometimes just for the sake of emphasis, we say, since we are faithless. It doesn't mean we're faithless continually, but it does indicate that, it's not uncommon for us to be unfaithful. But that one, he remains faithful, for, again, not is he able to deny himself. He would have to deny himself because he's made promises to you and I about what he's going to do. He's not a promise. He's not going to lose any. He's got a promise that we looked at the other day in John 10 that he holds us secure in our hand. So even when we are unfaithful, and all of these conditions above in these verses, they're all first-class conditions. And a lot of commentators kind of zip by it, but I did come across a commentary that really handles the Greek text, and they point out these are all first-class condition. Paul assumes all these are true, that we're going to blow it. But guess what? The great thing about that is, in the midst of a sad thing that is our blowing it, he can't deny himself, so he remains faithful, meaning faithful to the promises. And that's a big deal as Paul continues to deal with some issues about eternal security in the context. But I think this is a very important passage for you and I. Acts chapter 2 and verse 24, it says, "But God raised him from the dead, putting an end to the agony or the pains of death, since it was impossible," not was it possible, "for him to be held fast." That's one of those words that we were looking at, to show might, to bite might by a strong grip on something, for him to be held by its power. It was impossible. Jesus Christ was not just a man, he was also God, and therefore that person who was God could not remain in a state of death. He didn't die as God, he died as a man, but that person that died as a man was also God. And so it was impossible, he says, that he should remain in that death. Now, in keeping with this, there's another idea that I want to enter in, and that is God's never going to act then. These things here saying it's impossible, he cannot, he's untemptable. All these are saying, yeah, there are limits to God's power. They're limits of his own character. And we haven't looked at all of his attributes, and one of them we haven't looked at is righteousness, but if we were to go over to John chapter 7 and verse 18, at the end of this, it says, "He is true, and there is no unrighteousness in him." Unrighteousness in him, not is there, or is it? Doesn't exist. So you can guarantee that as God exercises his power, he's never going to use it to act in an unrighteous manner, because there is no unrighteousness in his character. It's contrary to his nature, and he's never going to exercise power in a way that's contrary to who he is. And that's really important for us to understand, because people that want to try to break apart the idea of God, they want to deconstruct who God is, things like that, and make God look silly in front of people. They're going to say, oh, they believe in an all-powerful God, but can he make a rock so big? Or how do you know he's not going to change his mind? And maybe he's going to break his promises with us and wipe us off. And he will not do that, because there is no unrighteousness in him. In fact, over in the book of Psalms, in 92 verse 15, it says, "Declare that the Lord is upright, he is my rock, and there is no," as we have lo, olah here in this case, and this ol, technically is the word oal that he uses here, is a word meaning to act twisted or perverse. Our Bible sometimes translated iniquity, but it has the idea of something twisted or perverse. There's nothing twisted or perverse in God. God is not, you look at one face, but he's twisted, so you might see something else. He's not like that. And all of this is very important for you and I to understand, that when God exercises power, he's going to exercise it in keeping with who he is. And we've seen that God is holy. We've seen that God is good. We've seen that God is love. And we've been pointing out in a couple of these passages that God is righteous, and there's no unrighteousness in him. If you understand this, it gives us assurance that the things that God's promised, he's going to be able to carry through, because his power makes it possible for him to be faithful to what he said, because he would have to deny himself, and he can't do that. That would be inconsistent with his nature. We can be thankful. We could worship God. We can say, God, I'm thankful that with all your might, all that powerful that you have that can create the universe, you are never going to use that in an unrighteous way. You're never going to use that to break your promises that you've made to us, because that would be unrighteous. You are in reality a God of truth. Worship God for those things. Thank him for that character. And have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me.